Good morning, criminology. So I'm here kind of late with the lectures 12 on crimes of violence, and then on chapter 14, which is property crimes. The reason why is because I thought that students weren't actually paying attention to the lectures or choosing just to read the book on their own, which is fine. But there are some of you who are actually in need of the lectures, so I will continue on with them. So pardon this one coming so late. So this week, again, we have two lectures, chapter 12 and chapter 14. This particular lecture is on chapter 12, which is crimes of violence, which I will go through in this one. As usual, let me share my screen with you guys, and we can follow along together. Okay, so this lecture specifically is on chapter 12, again, crimes of violence. And as usual, before we begin this lecture, you know that you can find the learning objectives on our Blackboard course website. You can also find them at the beginning of our textbook and every single chapter. They have their own learning objectives, so you can find them there. This week, there are only 5 learning objectives, so I'm going to go through them quick and then get into our chapter. So this week, our authors, Walsh and Jorgensen, they want us to discuss why violent crime has specifically dropped over the centuries. Why has it decreased? 2, they want us to identify the various types of murder, their victims, and the perpetrators. 3, they want us to explain the difference between mass, spree, and serial killers. 4, they want us to define the basic elements of rape, robbery, aggravated assault, as well as gun violence. And then 5, and lastly, Walsh and Jorgensen want us to be able to evaluate the sociological, the evolutionary, and the neuroscience theories of violence and their common lessons, the lessons that we can find across the board, across all 3. Sound good? So our chapter actually begins with violence in history. So a brief history of violence throughout the centuries. We start off with Eisner, and Eisner really focuses on European murder rates and how they have dropped. So Eisner's examination of European murder rates showed a drop from a high average of 32 per 100,000 in the 13th and 14th centuries to 1911, 3.2, 2.6, and 1.4 per 100,000 in the subsequent 5 centuries that were to follow. The state's monopoly of power, the organized discipline, but the state's monopoly of power, the expansion of universal schooling, the rise of religious reform movements and multiple religious reform movements, and the organized discipline of the manufacturing workplace largely accounted for the decline of violence over the centuries. So obviously, with all of these factors in place, people are busy, people are getting educated. There are different types of reform and social movements that are occurring. The workplace is expanding. So jobs and employment. So these, again, not causation, but correlation, right? So these may have influenced and probably have influenced the decline in the murder rates, not the murder rates, but violent crimes, okay? Pinker then asserts that Enlightenment values also contributed to the stark and steady decline in violence over the centuries, arguing that as societies become more rational, as societies become more democratic, as societies become more scientifically advanced, they become more moral, ultimately leading to, or thinking that this leads to a decline in violent crimes. Data also shows clearly that violence can be controlled and that violence may be the default option when controls are lacking, as social control theories maintained in our previous chapters. So violence can be controlled. Okay. This here is a figure from obviously our corresponding chapter, which is chapter 12. This here is figure 12.1. This is murder by victim and offender relationship in 2017. So I do want you guys to pause here briefly. One thing that I do want to say, again, this is the updated book. So this isn't our current text edition. I required the 3rd edition. So this is actually from the next edition up. This is 14. So your textbook is actually going to say murder by victim, offender relationship in 2014. This is the updated version, as you see here, in 2017. However, the figures are slightly similar, okay? So they can be interpreted almost the same. Sound good? So quickly, I do want to go over what some of this data is saying with you guys, okay? So here we can see about 12% of the murder that occurred within the family happened in 2017. We can see about 10% of murders happened by strangers in 2017. We can see about 50% happened by unknown perpetrators in 2017, and we see about 28% happened by other known perpetrators in 2017. Good, you see that? Okay, and I'm reading specifically from the pie chart on the side. So your book is going to say, because I'm looking at the 3rd edition, your book is actually going to say about 14% of the murders in 2014 took place within the family, okay? So also just most of the family relationships also, remember, are not biological. That is, most victims were spouses, stepchildren, half siblings, etc. So obviously I was reading from the pie chart, but then, right, if we move out of the pie chart, if we look at specifically the family types of murder, right, family by murder done within the family, we can break that up by husband, wife, mother, father, daughter, brother, sister, other. You can do the same thing with the other unknown down on the bottom. So you can see those breakdowns even further. Sound good? Okay. So we can move on. Pause here again. Make sure you understand this chart before moving on. So again, we're moving on to murder. We're on murder. So murder specifically is the willful, non-negligent killing of one human being by another, okay? Murder rates have been significantly higher in the past than they are today, primarily because of the lack of effective law enforcement and adequate medical attention. The United States murder rate is many times lower than most third world or developing countries with corrupt government and high rates of organized crime. However, the US rate is considerably higher than other stable and wealthy democracies that are more comparable. Okay. Let's go into the types of homicide in regards to murder. Okay, homicide specifically is the killing of a human being, which most of you guys should know. All homicides are not murder. A murder specifically, or a criminal homicide, is the killing of a human being without justification. A justification would be a self-defense or a law enforcement agent killing someone in the performance of his or her duty to prevent harm to himself or herself or others. Okay. So the types of homicide, we'll go into First, we'll go into aggravated or first degree murder, okay? So aggravated or first degree murder is specifically defined as the intentional, unlawful killing of one human being by another with premeditation or deliberation, okay? First degree murder is the only kind of murder for which a convicted murderer can be executed in states that have the death penalty. Sound good? Okay. So again, this is specifically in regards to aggravated or first degree murder. Again, it's defined as the intentional, unlawful killing of one human being by another with premeditation or deliberation. Okay, there has to be malice, there has to be premeditation, deliberation. And also first degree murder is the only kind of murder for which a convicted murderer can be executed in states with the death penalty. Okay. Second degree murder. Okay. Second degree murder, also called voluntary manslaughter in a number of states, is the intentional killing of another human being without premeditation or deliberation. Okay. Voluntary manslaughter is usually charged when the suspect had temporarily been in, for instance, when the suspect has been in such a high state of emotional arousal that his or her rational capabilities were somehow impeded, if that makes sense. Okay. The term passion specifically goes along with this type of murder. So the term passion can mean fear, anger, outrage, or any temporarily high state of emotional arousal in which the rational faculties that someone has were impeded and can result in, that can result from specifically provocations. Okay. Let's go into involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter, so it's a criminal homicide where an unintentional killing results from a reckless act. Okay. In such cases, the defendant is charged with consciously disregarding a substantial risk that he or she would know, he or she should know puts others in dangers of losing their lives. So an example of involuntary manslaughter is driving under the influence of alcohol. Okay, like if you guys have seen that, like in the news. Okay, that's an example of involuntary manslaughter, driving under the influence of alcohol. Okay, so once again, involuntary manslaughter is an unintentional killing that results from a reckless act. Okay, the charges are on the defendant, and for instance, driving under the influence of alcohol is an example of involuntary manslaughter. The last one is negligent manslaughter. Okay, negligent manslaughter is an unintentional homicide charged when a death arises from some negligent act that carries a substantial risk of death to others. Negligent homicide is charged when someone neglects to do something he or she should have rather than does something he or she should not have. So for example, driving an unsafe vehicle that should have been fixed is an example of negligent manslaughter. Good. Okay. Mass spree and serial murder. So knowing the difference between this is one of our learning objectives, and we're going to go into that right now. So mass and spree murder. Okay. Just quickly before I get into that, mass spree and serial murder, murder for revenge or personal gain is understandable because such motives have rational, if not moral elements. But gruesome bloodlust of killers baffles and terrifies us because it lacks any objectivity, rational motivation with which we can identify. So let's go into this, mass and spree murder. Mass murder specifically, so we'll get into the definitions first. Mass murder is the killing of several people at one location that begins and ends within a few minutes or hours, usually with the death of the killer, specifically by suicide. Okay. Spree murder, on the other hand, is the killing of several people at different locations over a period of several days. Good? Okay. Mass murderers are divided into two types. Okay. Those two types are those who choose specific targets the killer believes to have caused him or her stress, and those who attack targets having no connection with the killer, but who belong to groups the killer dislikes. Okay, so again, there are two types of mass murderers. Those who choose specific those who choose specific targets the killer believes to have caused him stress, and those who attack targets having no connection with the killer, but who belong to groups the killer dislikes. Okay. There are also traits of spree killers. Okay. Spree killers move from victim to victim in fairly rapid succession, and like mass murderers, make little effort to hide their activities or avoid detection, as if driven by some frenzied compulsion. Okay. Let's move into serial murder. Okay. So serial murder is the killing of 3 or more victims over an extended period of time with a cooling off period between the kills. Okay. Unlike mass and spree killers, who almost invariably use guns, serial killers tend to favor hands-on killing, often with the use of torture. So there are certain myths that we need to debunk, okay, specifically about serial killers. So serial killers, a couple of myths, so going over the myths right now. Serial killers are all dysfunctional loners. Serial killers are all white males. Serial killers are only motivated by sex. Serial killers travel and operate interstate. Serial killers cannot stop killing. All serial killers are insane or evil geniuses. Serial killers want to get caught. Serial killers are never women, etc. So these are just some of the myths, okay? So once again, we believe that serial killers are dysfunctional loners. Serial killers are all white. Serial killers can be only motivated by sex. Serial killers travel and operate interstate. Serial killers cannot stop killing. Serial killers are insane, evil geniuses. Serial killers want to get caught. And serial killers are never women, etc. These are myths. Okay, and there are definitely crimes that come into my head when going over these immediately. Okay. So pause here and just think of some of those on your own. Okay. So here we have figure 12.2. Okay, we're really looking at the prevalence of serial killing. This figure specifically illustrates the number and rate per million population of known serial killers per decade from 1900 to 1910, and then from 2000 to 2010. So please pause here and continue. So again, one more time before we move on, this figure shows the number and rate per million population of known serial killers per decade from 1900 to 1910, and then from 2000 to 2010. So if we really look further into it, if we look at the last bar represents the 245 known serial killers operating from 2000 to 2010, if you see that, Okay, the increase in rate of killers from the 1950s to the 1990s is probably only partly a real increase. Okay, so pause and then continue. The typology of serial killers. Okay. So the typology of serial killers is the next, and we're still continuing on with mass, spree, and serial. Sorry, my shoes, that's just like rubbery. Mass, spree, and serial murders. So let's go into the visionary serial killer. Okay, the visionary serial killer is typically out of touch with reality, maybe psychotic, and feels impelled to commit murder by visions or voices in the head. The mission-oriented serial killer feels that it is his or her mission in life to kill certain kinds of people. One example that comes to mind is, the mission-oriented serial killer that feels compelled to kill prostitutes. The hedonistic serial killer is the majority of serial killers. He or she kills for the thrills, specifically, and engaging in perverted sexual activity. And then lastly, the power control serial killer. This person gains more satisfaction from exercising complete power over his or her victims rather than from like the bloodlust. Although sexual activity is almost always involved with this type of serial killer. Okay. Theories of serial killing. Let's go into Elliot Layton's enemy theory. So Elliot Layton applied enemy theory, so review and go back to enemy theory, to explain serial killing across the centuries, proposing that different social classes have dominated the ranks of serial killers at different periods. Okay. Disinhibited counterculture theory. This arose during the period that had much to do with the increased prevalence because traditional values were questioned and rejected. And then social control theory, again, refer back to, I believe, 2 or 3 lectures ago, okay? Social control theory, actually 1 or 2 lessons ago, Robert Merton's social control theory. Social control theory emphasizes the role of the family. So the increasing breakdown of family also provides serial killers with large numbers of rootless potential victims. Okay. Sexual dysfunction theory. Extreme sexual dysfunction may result in deeply embedded feelings of worthlessness and powerlessness, the seeds of which may have already been implanted by childhood abuse. Okay. McDonald triad. Okay, this is a theory popular among serial killer profilers, the McDonald triad, which consists of 3 childhood predictors. So, frequent bedwetting, okay, specifically past the age of 15, fire setting, and cruelty to animals. And then lastly, Stephen Giangelo's diathesis stress theory or model. This model attempts to integrate cultural, developmental, psychological, and biological concepts. Okay. Lastly, in regards to mass, spree, and serial murders or murderers, let's go into offending profiling. Okay. Profiling is done by extensive interviewing and formal psychological testing of incarcerated killers in order to develop a typology based on personality and other offender characteristics. Criminal profiling is not a scientific discipline that results in accurate profiles. Instead, it is more of an informed speculation that results in a lot of errors. Okay. Again, we're going into violent types of crime. I feel like I should have said trigger warning at the beginning of this lecture, but this is a trigger warning from myself as well as whoever is on the screen. So the next topic or the next type of violent crime we go over is rape. So trigger warning, okay? So rape. So the likely victims of rape happen to be most often, and again, most often, it doesn't mean that they only happen to these types of people, but they happen to be poor, young, unmarried, non-white females who are disproportionately victimized. They are likely to be victimized by rape, and poor, young, unmarried, non-white males are also disproportionately likely to be the perpetrators. Okay. Some of the theories around rape. Let's look at some feminist theories. Feminist theories maintain that all men have a propensity to rape. That doesn't mean that all men are going to rape, but they have the propensity to rape, and that the act is about power and not about the sexual act itself. Social learning theory. Social learning theory and feminist theory assert that rape is the result of male socialization, okay? How men are socialized. And if you are taking an intro to social class, remember, we are socialized right before, like during conception, okay? When mom and dad, when partners, doesn't have to be mom and dad, right? It could be a same gender loving couple, a trans couple, etc. But when you find out that you've conceived, we start already planning for this kid's life, for this child's life. That's when socialization begins, okay? Evolutionary theories. So evolutionary theorists maintain that it is maladaptive, consequences of male reproductive strategy. So rape is sexually motivated. Force is a tactic and not a goal when it comes to rape, etc. Okay. Specifically, therapists who work with rapists assert that in most cases, rape is sexually motivated and that violence is a tactic used to gain sexual compliance. It's not the goal. Continuing on, right? Early surveys of high school and college students found that most males and some females believe force is justifiable. And lastly, most studies concentrate on violent rapists. Sound good? Okay. Let's go into robbery, okay? Another violent type of crime, okay? What is robbery though? Robbery, is a violent crime, and robbers tend to be the most impulsive, the most hedonistic, daring, and dangerous of all street criminals, as well as the least educated and conscientious, okay? Robbery is also considered an excellent way to prove a certain kind of manliness in certain urban areas. Okay. So let's go into traits of robbers. Okay. Hold on just a second. Yeah. Not traits of robbers, sorry. let's go into the gender of robbery, because I just kind of went over the traits, what they're trying to prove, etc. So the gender of gender and robbery. Okay, most female robbers share the same street culture with their male counterparts. Okay, so there are similarities there. A favorite ploy for female robbers is to appear sexually available. Okay. Why are so few women involved in robbery compared with the involvement of other crimes and resources? That's something that we should think about. Okay. So we're really focused, or our authors really focus on women. However, again, robbery and who becomes a robber does not discriminate. Okay. Aggravated assault. Aggravated assault is the most frequently committed of the violent crimes. Each such incident carries the threat of ending up as criminal homicide. But for speedy access to medical treatment, many of them would have been so or done so. Okay, so aggravated assault is the unlawful attack by one person. These crimes do carry the potential of becoming, if you are involved, if you commit, it does carry the potential of becoming a murderer. It's perpetrated over trivial matters. Okay, victim also precipitated. Gun violence. Okay, there are obviously debates on gun control. Opponents of gun control accuse pro-gun control advocates of cherry-picking their countries to make their point and produce their own cherry-picked figures to make the opposing argument, the opposing point. Opponents of gun control also complain that gun control advocates use most relatively low crime countries for their comparisons as well. Guns may have a strong and direct causal effect on violence in general, but they do not make violence more lethal. In the absence of a gun, an altercation, between people will leave them bloodied but alive. Lastly, the last major section of our book goes into theories of violence, and that's where we're going to end off. Okay, so theories of violence. Sociologists might ask what it is about the social structure of society or the norms of a subculture within it that leads to high rates of violence. Psychologists might ask what personality features, situations, or developmental experiences increase the risk of violence. Geneticists might inquire about the mix of genetics and environmental factors associated with violence in particular populations at a particular time. A subculture of violence is one in which the norms, values, and attitudes of its members legitimize the use of violence to resolve conflicts. Honor subcultures, specifically, this is a definition, are defined as communities in which young men are hypersensitive to insult, rushing to defend their reputation in dominant kind of contests. Okay. Evolutionary, and I didn't post it up here, but evolutionary biologists assume that violence evolved to some set of adaptive problems. If it didn't solve some such problems, it wouldn't be a part of our behavioral repertoire. And then neuroscience shares the sociological and evolutionary positions that a major long-term factor in violence instigation is how much violence a person has been exposed to in the past. Violence and inequality, okay? When the young perceive little opportunity for legitimate success, and when many people they know die at an early age, living for the present and engaging in risky violence to obtain resources makes excellent evolutionary sense to those young people. It's a theory as to why violence may occur. Okay. Wilson and Daly assert that natural selection has designed people to compete for the status and resources necessary for survival and reproductive success by whatever means are available to them in the cultural environments in which they live. They have hypothesized that neighborhoods with the lowest income levels and the shortest life expectancies, excluding homicides, would have the highest homicide rates. Okay, so that is chapter 12 for you guys. Okay, I'm going to come back quickly with chapter 14 and upload those for you. Chapter 14 is on property crimes. Sound good? I will definitely see you guys in a little bit.